In our previous episode, the Battle of Lincoln, King Stephen was captured at the end of the battle by the Angevin forces led by Robert of Gloucester. With the king now in custody after being knocked out, he awoke and complained that this was not the treatment a king deserves, and that his enemies were breaking the faith. The chronicler William of Malmesbury states that Robert treated the king justly, without harm coming to him, nor insulted. King Stephen's first stop as a prisoner would be at Gloucester, to be presented to his cousin, the Empress Matilda. As the news would take a few days to reach her, she must have been waiting anxiously, and when she did receive the news, she must have breathed a sigh of relief. The throne was now closer to being hers than ever before, but claiming the throne of England is never an easy task. King Stephen arrived in Gloucester on the 9th of February 1141, and finally, after several years, Empress Matilda was face to face with King Stephen. Sadly, there is no record of what was said during their meeting, which is a great shame. She may have chastised King Stephen for taking the throne and breaking his oath to her and Henry I. Without a written account, the topic of conversation is lost. After meeting with Empress Matilda, King Stephen was transported to Bristol Castle. Our sources mention the tale of Robert Curthose, the eldest son of William the Conqueror, who inherited the Duchy of Normandy but later lost it to his younger brother, Henry I. Robert would spend the rest of his life imprisoned in various castles. The Anglo-Saxon chronicles state that when the king was in prison, the earls and powerful men expected that he would never get out again, expressing that King Stephen might share the same fate. Although King Stephen was now a prisoner, the fighting continued as lords and barons took the law into their own hands, and some even waged private wars. Alan, the Earl of Richmond, tried to ambush Ranulph, the Earl of Chester, but failed and was captured in the process. He was then tortured until he submitted to Ranulph and handed over his castles. Ranulph was now becoming more powerful and influential, yet despite King Stephen's predicament, some men did fight for him, yet some quickly changed allegiances to Empress Matilda. Empress Matilda's next step would be to convince the clergy to support her, as the Archbishop of Canterbury would be the one to crown her queen. This task might seem difficult on the outset, as one of the leading figures in the English Church was King Stephen's brother, Henry of Winchester. But if we remember our previous episodes, King Stephen's relationship with his brother and the Church was strained after the bishop's arrest in 1139, something Empress Matilda could exploit to her advantage. She soon arranged to meet with Bishop Henry, leaving Gloucester on the 17th of February, and along the way the citizens of Cirencester welcomed the Empress on her way to Winchester. Bishop Henry's goal had always been securing the safety of England, and as his brother was now defeated and in chains, it was more prudent to ally with the victor, as the situation was unique. So, moving forward to help crown Empress Matilda would be the sensible move. At the beginning of 1141, Empress Matilda met Bishop Henry outside Winchester. Our sources mention the weather, which is a quintessentially English thing to do. Empress Matilda swore that she would allow Bishop Henry to gift bishoprics as well as control the main accounts in England if he accepted her in the Holy Church as lady and kept faith in her. A bold gesture to sway Bishop Henry to her side, which worked. Henry swore to uphold her based on the promises made to him. With all the negotiations nearly done, Empress Matilda was invited into the city of Winchester. The bishops then granted her the keys to the castle and the royal treasury. The people of Winchester then gathered to hail her as Queen of England, before moving on towards the cathedral, where she met more members of the English clergy. One member Empress Matilda did not meet was Theobald of Bec, the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was needed to crown her, yet when they did meet in Oxford, he proclaimed that he could not support her, as he had sworn to King Stephen an oath, something he could not break without the king's permission. Empress Matilda did allow the Archbishop to meet with King Stephen, who, according to William of Malmesbury, agreed to release him from his oath. With the Archbishop now free to aid Empress Matilda, a church council was organised. Now a case was made to accept Empress Matilda as ruler. Bishop Henry stated that his brother, King Stephen, had failed to honour the rights of the church, using the arrest of the bishop in 1139 as evidence. He then criticised his brother further and stated, "Therefore, as it seems long to wait for a sovereign who delayed coming to England, for she resided in Normandy, we provided for the peace of the country, and my brother was allowed to reign. And although I gave myself a surety between him and God, that he would honour and advance the Holy Church, and uphold good, but abrogate evil, laws, yet it grieves me to remember, shames me to say, how he conducted himself in the kingdom, how justice ceased to be exerted, how peace was annihilated almost within the year." To summarise, Bishop Henry was offering excuses for the support he gave to his brother in his early reign, and that God had abandoned him. After making these justifications, Bishop Henry reminded the bishops that they should support the decision to crown Empress Matilda lest the kingdom fall into decay, and to further cement the new status quo, anyone who objected, Bishop Henry, as papal legate, would excommunicate them. He then proclaimed Empress Matilda as Domine Anglorum, Lady of the English. While all this planning and declaration were going on, King Stephen was still chained up at Bristol Castle, but his cause wasn't lost just yet. His biggest supporter was making her own moves. Queen Matilda was still fighting for King Stephen. She had not given up, and together with William of Ypres, they were rallying what forces they could in Kent. There were also a few earls that had not submitted to Empress Matilda. The Earl of Worcester still controlled Worcestershire for King Stephen. The Earl of Surrey and Simon de Celis, Earl of Northampton, still supported the king. They feared that if Empress Matilda was crowned, their lands would be at risk from the Scottish King David, who could quite easily take them over with the support of the Empress in order to secure England. Queen Matilda had written to Empress Matilda and asked to release her husband and that her son Eustace be granted his inheritance, but this was denied firmly. While all these correspondence were going back and forth, Empress Matilda was making her way to London, slowly, stopping off along the way to receive the good wishes of the people of England. She first stopped at Reading to visit the tomb of her father Henry I, where she accepted the loyalty of the people before moving back to Oxford, where she had set up court. Before moving on to London, however, Empress Matilda needed the support of the Earl of Essex, as he was the castellan of the Tower of London, a location she needed to control if she was to secure London. To woo him to her side, she drew up a charter naming him Earl, as she was discarding King Stephen's own charters, and to further sweeten the deal, she offered him the position of Sheriff of Essex, and forgave him the debt he owed to the crown under King Henry, a tempting offer which he soon accepted. With the Tower now under her allegiance, Empress Matilda soon entered London. However, at Windsor, a town on the outskirts of London, Windsor Castle was still loyal to King Stephen, so Empress Matilda moved around it and reached London in the middle of June 1141. The Empress was welcomed into the city by the Londoners, and she soon made herself at home. Everything was falling into place. The church was on her side, her rival was locked up and most likely to be left in a prison for the remainder of his days, and she was in the English capital. Smooth sailing so far. Empress Matilda soon started issuing orders, emulating her late father's leadership. She filled the vacant position of the London bishop with a nominee that pleased everyone politically. She also wanted London back firmly under royal control, and she began this by issuing taxation. This did not please the Londoners, as King Stephen had exempted them from paying tax in order to gain favour. Empress Matilda was not King Stephen, she was the daughter of King Henry, and as such, she expected them to pay tax. After all, would they have refused to pay if her father was still alive? One major blunder Empress Matilda made was alienating her new allies. She refused Bishop Henry's suggestion of granting King Stephen's son his inheritance, possibly because she didn't want a situation her father had to deal with, as the son of Robert Curthose caused grief for King Henry, so potentially King Stephen's son might rise up and try to overthrow her or her heir. This disagreement upset Bishop Henry enough that he left her court and headed to Winchester. The chroniclers of the time mention that Empress Matilda's attitude was arrogant. The Chronicles of King Stephen mention that when Empress Matilda demanded the Londoners pay tax, every trace of woman's gentleness was removed from her face, and she blazed into an intemperate fury. John of Worcester calls her hard heart. Henry of Huntingdon also mentions she displayed an insufferable arrogance. Perhaps if we placed Henry I in this situation, would the chroniclers have been as harsh or even praised him? Empress Matilda was acting, in my opinion, how her father would have acted. After all, she had watched him govern for years, so it should be no surprise Empress Matilda would try and imitate her late father's leadership style. Moving on, after conducting the business of the day, Empress Matilda retired for the evening, when suddenly bells started ringing and shouting began. The people of London had risen up against Empress Matilda, and they soon started attacking her followers. To make matters worse, Queen Matilda was marching with a force towards London. Empress Matilda had little time to get her bearings. She grabbed what she could and fled London with her advisors. Empress Matilda's situation had gone from great to dismal, and now she was on the retreat. Her dinner was still warm when the London mob broke into her apartment.